in Lament, may we just take a moment and consider these empty shoes, representing the children in the story that we heard from Matthew, killed by a threatened tyrant, and also the children in Gaza being killed right now. We also remember in this story that Jesus, our Lord, was a refugee, that Jesus was one who fled his homeland, parents who fled in fear. And our two speakers today know something about the experience of families of refugees, even refugees in their own land. I want to invite first to speak with us Marianne, and later Michelle will follow a short presentation, short reflection time from Marianne, and then Michelle will share, and we'll have a little time for Q&A as time allows afterwards. I just want to introduce Marianne. She's been a dear friend and sister, and she's also a therapist, an AMFT, practicing psychotherapy here through a social justice framework. And so if you know anyone or you yourself are looking for a therapist, I think you're accepting clients. As many of us have been grieving what's happening in Gaza and other parts of the world, it takes a mental toll, and Marianne has a calling to really work with people who are activists or who are called to the long haul work of justice. We've collaborated with her here in 2 different gatherings for activists, especially those involved in the movement for Palestinian rights, and I've just so appreciated her presence and her way of gathering people and creating safe space for healing work. So Marianne, if you'll please come forward and share a little bit more about yourself, if you would like. We're so glad to have you with us this morning. Thank you. Can we put that back in? Short, before we transition, I forgot to say the kids are welcome to the stage if you would like, with Jason and Sue and any other volunteers, and they'll be doing some children's activities and arts as well during the service. Also, kids, if you'd like, before you go after the service, I didn't announce this earlier, but we have little coloring workbooks for you called Handala's Return. This is a book about a refugee child, a cartoon from Palestine. You could learn more about his story if you prefer to color or take that home later. Thank you, Mike.
It's hard to see the empty shoes and not think that there are communities in Gaza who everyone they know have died. So in a way, look around you. Their experience is like people who've worshipped with them, their friends are no longer. And what remains is their clothing and their empty shoes. And may we be spared. And at the same time, may we always not forget them. That wasn't part of my talk, but here we go. So in my psychotherapy work, some of my clients talk about what it feels like to be gaslit in relationships. Growing up as a Palestinian is like growing up when everyone around you has been gaslit by Israeli false narrative, and you feel like you're losing your mind watching people have lies take over their hearts and minds. And with false narratives, people start saying things like, Israel and Palestine is complicated, when actually it's far from that. It's brutally simple, and maybe more simple than children movies that are created by Disney. This is the story. Israel is a colonial power, seizing land that is not theirs, manipulating history, religion, and collective trauma to justify political gains. It's the replacement of native people with outsiders flown from overseas to populate the land, and killing the indigenous population and their children. then stripping the survivors of their rights while elevating the settler population to first-class citizenship. The narrative, "it is complicated," is meant to inflict self-doubt on you, but I'm thankful for opportunities like this where we can explore together, and if you have any doubt, we can bring it up and talk about it. What Israel does not want you to forget, what does not want you to remember, is that it has always sought the extermination of the Palestinian people, both Christians and Muslims, and this is nothing new. All throughout the years, Palestinians have been calling out against the Israeli occupation, but because dehumanization is so powerful against us, we were not taken seriously. In the past 2 years, Palestinians and their supporters have been telling the world Gazans have less and less food to eat. But this news may only be covered in the Western media when Western institutions talk about it. So we look at Gaza today. We have more amputee children in Gaza than anywhere in the world, and no one has stopped Israel. We have Palestinian families burning in tents, and no one has stopped Israel. If you want to attend one funeral a day for every child that's been killed in Gaza, you need 52 years to attend a funeral each day. And no one has stopped Israel. All schools and universities are destroyed, and no one has stopped Israel. We no longer have a medical system, and civil institutions are no longer existing in Gaza, and no one has stopped Israel. Our doctors and journalists are being slaughtered, and no one has stopped Israel. The global humanitarian sector and international law have been paralyzed, and no one has stopped Israel. Instead, Israel is showered with financial and political support to finish its mission, which is the eradication of the Palestinians as a people. The helpful part of the world that we are part of here is not moving fast enough. For years, Palestinians have been saying the US is not a neutral broker for peace, and no one believed us. Today, we see the US conspiring with Israel to obstruct talks, to delay agreements, to weaponize food, to threaten neighboring countries, and to give Israel political clout and supply them with money and weapons for genocide. Americans themselves are now killing Palestinians directly through participation in the Israeli army or the alleged Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So how does it feel to be a Palestinian Christian in the US, where we are surrounded in government and in churches by strong Zionism? It's a strong betrayal, but it is nothing new. And it's important to distinguish the church in Palestine from the church in the US, because the church in Palestine is suffering like all Palestinians from Israeli colonialization. I can't say that word very well, but there we go. In the US, some churches practice a religion that I'm unaware of. The dehumanization of Palestinians is so entrenched in churches that they don't even confront what a dangerous theology might mean for people like me, or what it means to imagine a God turned into a racist real estate agent. For a country that talks endlessly about Jesus' relationship with him, for a country that didn't accept me as a Catholic when I came here 18 years ago, it seemed, because I didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus, it seems that Jesus has all but vanished from some American churches. In today's readings, we honor the children who were murdered, we honor them as martyrs, and we grieve them in a way that gives them their right place in the history of salvation. This is how we survive atrocities. We give them meaning. But that's not what I want for Palestinian children. I do not want Palestinian children to play a part in the journey to freedom. I just want them to play. There's a narrative that wants you to think that what's happening in Israel-Palestine has to do with religion. It does not. It's about ideology. It's about seizing power, wealth, resources, and control. And because Palestinian Christians and Muslims are seen by governments as subhuman, genocide now has become justifiable. If we look different, or if we maybe, I don't know, were the right nationality or right race, I don't think genocide would have survived for 2 years. And the impact of genocide spans through generations, at least 4. I personally know something about this because on my mom's side, I'm descendants of Armenian genocide survivors. But to allow genocides to still happen today is to condemn current and future generations. And this is what we're doing when we do not stop Israel and when we let our churches off the hook for being complicit. I know that many people in this room share deep sorrow with Palestinians, and you have been the face of resistance in Pasadena. I am honored to stand with you, and I am grateful to witness your pain, because I wouldn't have survived the last 2 years without you. So thank you for places like this. Thank you for having pastors like Katerina. They don't come easy. So the fact that you have her is a big, big deal. And trust me, I know. So thank you for listening. Thank you for inviting me to your church. And I'm glad that you'll hear from Michelle next, because actually Michelle comes from where Jesus was born, in the Bethlehem area. Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. Marianne, I wasn't ready for this, okay? But I want to share more personal experience with everybody here.
You're taller.
Is it better now? Okay. So my experience being here as a Palestinian in the United States is similar to Marianne's. I had difficulty explaining to people about me being Palestinian. By the way, this is not what I wrote. This is not my notes, but I'm just want to share a point of view that Marianne spoke about. I had a lot of hard time to talk to people about myself being Palestinian and a Christian at the same time. Assuming the common, I would say, wisdom here, or conventional wisdom in the United States towards Christians in Palestine is that Christians in Palestine are to be sacrificed for the goals of the temple, I would say, or the third temple. So I was looked at as a necessary sacrifice for the sake of Israel. Anyway, I come from Beit Sahur. Beit Sahur is a small city northeast of Bethlehem, and there is a big relation between Beit Sahur and Bethlehem. Bethlehem is the city where Jesus was born. Beit Sahur, where the shepherds were told about the birth of Jesus. If you go to Luke 2nd, between 8 and 12, it tells you about how the angels were, and I'm going to quote from Luke, and there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. This is what we called al-bishara, or the good news, that came out to the world and came out from the shepherd's field, which is Beit Sahur called as a shepherd's field. After that event, my family has been lived there for a long time as as part of that region, Beit Sahur and Bethlehem based on many historic resources, including the Bible, were there for a long, long time. And as far as I know, that Beit Sahur specifically was established in the last age of the Bronze Age, which is date back 2,000 years before Jesus Christ. So when people spoke here about Palestinians don't belong to Palestine, it always come to my mind that the lies that been spread out through time about Palestine and Palestinians, and that Palestinians do not belong to the country there, it was, to me, didn't make sense to me as Palestinian. So it was difficult to accept that narrative as a Christian and as Palestinian. And honestly, thinking about what to talk here, I just want to talk about the narrative, the Christian narrative here, which is talks about the relation about Christianity and Israel. And specifically, I want to talk about about theology. And it's not my strongest thing that I can talk about, but as a Christian growing up there, close to the church, somehow I grow up to know that the distinguish between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And when I moved here, I found out that a lot of Christians here quote from the Old Testament. And to analyze that, I found out that the quoting from the Old Testament was necessary for the evangelists in this country to justify the narrative of Israel. Some used to say that the Jews have a title to Palestine. And I want to make sure that, the Israel that people talk about here is not misunderstood. The people are different than the entity that we see today. It's much different. Some churches here, or more accurate to say, they call themselves churches, twisting the Bible to promote warfare. And those churches that I hear about, talking about how they should help Israel to colonize Palestine. And I see that is like an antichrist church. They are advocating for a third temple, which according to the Bible is, it's not our thing to do. I will refer to Thessalonians, the second, which says, do not let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed. So there is a lot of verses in the New Testament actually talks about and talks about the right of Israel. Talks about that the promise that give to Israel in the Old Testament is not the same. It's invalid today. And as a Christian, I always ask the Western Christians to stop quoting from the Old Testament and read more of the New Testament. And I always ask myself the questions, what would Jesus do or say? Would he say that only to value one group of lives and we are going to demolish and massacre the rest of the lives? Would he really strip people of their humanity? Would he say today that we should strip Palestinians their humanity and demolish them because God made a promise 3,000 years ago to the Israelites? So, despite all the biblical evidence, evangelical Christians still maintain the doctrine of God's chosen people, which shows us that although Zionism is a problem within these churches, the biggest problem is that those Christians are still refusing to believe what the Bible say about Christianity. My point here is a lot of Christians still believe that Israel has the right to the land, while the Bible tells us they don't. My personal experience in Palestine is I was born there, and I come from a family that suffered occupation repeatedly, generation after generation. I grew up in a family that my grandfather was jailed because he raised resistance. I have uncle who still live in exile, and he cannot go back. Not because he's Christian, because he's Palestinian. And I have family members who were jailed for a long period of times. Cousins got killed simply because they were resisting. So Israeli didn't actually distinguish between Palestinian Christian or Palestinian Muslims. They just killed everybody who resists. That's it. Thank you.
Shukra. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Marianne, for your sharing. I think for the sake of time, I'll just ask if you're willing to stay a few minutes after the service. We'll just have a little time of Q&A informally up here with anyone who wants to linger to ask questions that may be burning after you heard some of their stories and reflections. And as you could hear, two very different stories representing the diversity of Christians in Palestine, and also calling us to enact our faith in Jesus, to live it out and not to follow in the steps of Christian Zionism. I wonder if I should switch microphones here. Let's see if I take it off, if it's better. Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and just move to a time of response in song and in prayer.